How long had they been down here in this place? To be exact, the hacker had kept count. He had kept count of every single day they had been down in this place. The mine. Matt sat there smiling to himself. He smiled very softly. He'd waited so long. Today was the day he would finally break out of this hellhole. Sure, it would take effort, but Matt was alright with that, even if he died. Matt was sneaking around. He'd finally gotten his hatchet. But what he did, he made an improvised knife, also known as a shank. He smiled, wondering, very, very softly wondering. It's a soft thought, a delicate thought. He wondered how high the body count could be this time. He knew exactly what to do. He waited till it was nighttime. Once it was, he soon got up, getting his plan set. He took his hand and stuffed it in his mouth and began gagging. He heard footsteps moving to his cell. But soon, he threw up. He quickly yanked his hand out of his mouth and threw up all over the floor. After he threw up, he coughed. The guard came and winced at what he saw. He thought it was rather disgusting. Then Matt collapsed onto his knees and kept coughing more spastically, as if he was hacking out his lungs. The dog, of course, knew he had to do something to one of his best workers to ensure that he didn't get sick or die. The boss wouldn't like it. He opened the cell and said, "Alright, come on." Pathetic wrench. Grabbed him by his arm, yanked him up, and dragged him out the cell. When they were far enough down the hallway, Matt quickly turned his feet, grabbed his mouth, pushed him up against the wall, took his improvised knife, and slammed it into his throat. The dog's eyes widened. He tried to fight, but Matt quickly yanked the knife left and right, tearing his throat open, giving him another smile below the chin. He smiled at him. At this point, Matt lost control of himself. Matt couldn't control himself now. And what would happen next would forever haunt anyone who'd see it. As the diamond dog fell onto the floor, he'd spend his last few seconds in the most painful experience of his life, as his essence drenched onto the floor, staining it. The dark Matt did everything in his power not to go deeper, not to cut his face off or disembowel him and leave his organs all over the floor, or nail them up above to the ceiling, or to decapitate him, to do anything that would psychologically trigger someone else into fear, to panic, because that's what always got them down. He crouched down in a stance that one can only call a predator, and began softly moving, so soft that he didn't make a sound. His breathing was almost non-existent. This wasn't any pony. This wasn't a human. Hell, this wasn't Matt. This was a side of him that no one would ever see if he could help it. He got so close. This time he snapped. He left that diamond dog dead on the floor. He soon went up, smiled very softly. He crouched down and looked over. He saw two different diamond dogs. To his left was the barracks. To his right was the med bay. And in front of him was the control room to all the cells. He knew which. He went in there to the control room. And when he walked in, he saw the guard sleeping. It was only one guard. They made it too easy. So many thoughts were running through his head: how he'd kill him, how he'd make his death painful. Then he noticed his arm. He smiled. His left arm was splayed out in a sideways V while his head rested on it. His right arm was extended outward across the panel. However, it was slightly elevated. Matt, it was practically Christmas for him right there. Matt went up, lifted his boot, and slammed it on the base of his elbow, creating a horrible snapping sound and a pop. The dog yanked its eyes open, was about to scream, but Matt quickly put his shirt over the dog's head and then took his arm and quickly muffled his mouth. Before the dog could scream, he turned him, pushed him against the wall, took his knife and rammed it into his stomach. He yanked it to the left. Dropping the knife, he took his hand and rammed it into the wound and began yanking out what to some would look like streamers from hell. He yanked out the dog's intestines onto the floor. The dog was horrified and in so much agonizing pain. Matt was treating this like it was some form of art. He was treating this like it was Play-Doh, nothing more. Seeing the dog fell over in shock from the amount of blood loss and pain, Matt picked up the knife with his blood-soaked arm, went over and released them. He released every prisoner. Now a riot would happen. He went over, took his shirt, put it on, smiling. Through all that, he never left that smile. You could hear the guards from the barracks moving, and hear some commotion in the med bay. Matt rushed over, crouched down at the very edge of the doorway in the control room, watching at least maybe 10 guards run out. Before number 10 could run out, Matt rushed him, charged, and tackled him into the room while the alarm was blaring. He struggled with the guard, but here's what he did do. He took both his hands and forced them onto his throat, choking him. When he tried to pry off his hands, he moved his arms back, took him, and slammed him against both sides of his temples so it would disorient him. Dog held his head in pain. Matt smiled. Again, he kept smiling. He grabbed him by his left arm, yanked him over, pulled out his hatchet, took it, and rammed down into his back. The first thing to go was his right shoulder blade, then a few slashes onto his lower back. A hack onto the upper back ripped out a little bit of meat. He kept slashing, slamming. This wasn't out of rage. This wasn't out of spite, anger. This was out of a playful attitude. All the while, he was happy. Truly happy. He had never felt so alive in his life. It wasn't even out of revenge. It was just because he knew he could. He knew he could. He knew he could, and no one else could stop him. He then lifted his head up, smiling. His head immediately turned right and he looked into the med bay. He knew that those unicorns, earth ponies, and Pegasus could handle themselves. He went to the med bay. He saw 3. 2 guards and 1 diamond dog that looked like it was a doctor or something. The 2 guards saw him, covered in blood, but what they saw next was truly sickening. He had the head of the last diamond dog. His eyes were gouged out, and he had a Chelsea grin from ear to ear on his decapitated head. He smiled as he tossed it. It rolled down the waist. The diamond dogs were in shock, then panic, then fear. Delicious fear. The reason why Matt loved fear is because when fear kicks in, it takes total form, total control, stops all decision making, makes thoughts harder, makes actions slightly hesitant. And he also loves blind rage. It causes them to rush without thought. They're practically killing themselves without even knowing it. And Matt is so happy he could tip the scale into his favor with just a few things of art. The diamond dog on the left was in fear, total feared shock. The one on the right was in a blind rage, killing his friend. He charged forward, screaming, with a spear. However, he stood there waiting for him. When he got close enough, the bayonet charge, or the spear charge, the diamond dog was doing, Matt very quickly moved right, kicked the spear left, rushed in, grabbed him by his shirt, took his knife and rammed it into his upper jaw. The diamond dog howled in pain and agony the best it could. He wrenched the knife outwards with so much strength it ripped out part of his jaw. Then he pushed him onto the floor as he stood there in pain, trying his best to hold it. Somehow, some way, it would just make the pain go away, but that's not the case. He turned back, smiling still. He took the knife, put it towards him, and licked up the blade with the blood, smiling with his soulless dead eyes. He didn't care if he died. He put the knife away and pulled out his hatchet. There's a reason they call him the hacker. Because once he's done, there's nothing left. Or, if he's feeling good about himself, he'll make an art piece out of him. He rushed forward, sprinting with all of his might. Most didn't know this, but Matt was stupidly strong. He knew that strength was the key to everything. Well, he knew as long as you overpowered the individual. Besides that, he rushed forward. The second one trying to back away, but Matt lunged forward. The Diamond Dog had dropped a spear on the ground out of shock. That was his mistake. Matt took it and rammed it directly into the frontal lobe of its forehead. The Diamond Dog fell to his knees, shock plastered onto his face. Matt took his boot, put it on his face, and yanked out, causing it to fall onto its back. He took 1 step forward, 2 steps forward, 3 steps forward, to the last one left. Still with that mantic, beautiful smile plastered on his face. The Diamond Dog backed up and simply said, "No, please. Please, no, please. I'll do anything." Anything? All the Diamond Dogs were unconscious. Well, all but the ones Matt took care of. Matt came back in the room with the pony staring at him in horror. He had blood all over him. Smiling, he closed the door behind him to the med bay. He pulled the bodies, smiled at them and said, "Let's get to work." He would leave the Diamond Dogs alive for now. But he had a plan. He wanted them to go out and tell their friends, the others. He knew there were others, the other caves, what happened. That way they knew not to fuck with him. Otherwise, he'd paint their fucking innings all over the cave. As far as the eye could see, he'd paint a whole fucking landscape of them. He'd throw the bodies in a cart, the ones he killed, disemboweled most of them, and tossed the intestines and innings over the side of the cart to make them hang. Then he made the minecart move as it went forward and went further in. Then he heard the mantic howls of fear. They didn't know what to think of it, of course, the Diamond Dogs. He turned to the ponies, smiled and said, "All right." He turned to all the sheets and mattresses, lit a fire, and they went out the back way. Not before coming out of the armory, where Matt grabbed his little toy. Matt always has a few items. He has his hatchet, He has a few throwing axes, and he also has a fire axe. He walked out, smiling. Then he took back control as the ponies ran. They ran to go to the village. It was quite a ways away. Either to tell them what happened, get help, or whatever. The fire would eat up all the oxygen. The ones who didn't make it out would probably die in the fire that would spread, because he left it. He had purposely spread charcoal everywhere, or coal or whatever, that would burn. They would die trying to get out. Of course, the other diamond dogs had ran out, and they ran in a certain direction, split into two, running in certain directions. They knew not to mess with him, because they saw what he had done. To go tell the other caves what happened. He smiled. And if those didn't die in there by the fire, they'd die, because the fire was eating up all the oxygen, so they'd suffocate. Beautiful. It's almost like a masterpiece. Almost like a beautiful, beautiful masterpiece.